It's the Sunday Pilot here on Sim Sunday with the second in my port over videos from the main channel, recorded back in August 2020. And you join me on board the PMDG 737-800 of Air Europa from Turin across to Madrid Barajas International Airport. It is Graham here with another sitting time here on Living the Dream. I recorded this particular flight on the same wet August Sunday afternoon that I recorded my last flight in the British Airways Aerosoft Airbus A320 from London Heathrow down to Turin, where we are now, in a PMDG 737-800 of Air Europa, which I think is Spain's second largest airline after the national carrier Iberia. As I said in my last video, I'm no professional pilot, as you're going to see in this episode of Sim Time, and I enjoy nothing better on a wet Sunday afternoon than to fly virtually in my simulator, which of course is Prepared 3D version 4.5. So my goal of this video is very simple, and that is to show you what is possible with a simple PC, a decent processor and graphics card with Prepared 3D version 4.5 of course, and a joystick. So for those who are interested, I have a self-built PC. I recently upgraded it at the end of 2019 with an Intel i9 quad-core processor, 32 gigs of RAM. I'm using a 2080 Ti graphics card from Nvidia, and probably over €1,000 worth of add-on scenery for my flight simulator. Yeah guys, I've gone a bit over the top through the years. I've also only purchased the PMDG 737 in the last 6 weeks. I was told that this was a study level aircraft, but being the amateur pilot I am, I never read a manual, I never RTFM, and I've certainly not read anything on how to fly the 737 from PMDG, except watch a couple tutorial videos on YouTube. And as I record this introduction, you will notice that I've been in SimBrief, preparing a standard flight plan from Turin to Madrid Barajas International Airport in Spain. And just like the last flight, I've chosen to take on only 100 passengers and 5 tons of cargo. I also did remember to instruct SimBrief to calculate our weight in pounds today, because after all, I'm flying the 737. And I guess the 737 next generation is still a tad old school compared to the Airbus. And as you can see here, I'm uploading the flight plan into Prepared so that ATC can provide me with the correct instructions. And this is where I'm going to apologise, because just like in the last video that I made on the Airbus from London down to Turin, I didn't realise that ATC was coming through in a separate speaker and therefore wasn't going to be picked up by my screen capture software. Okay, back in the cockpit, it is time to program the FMC. And for me, this was the most daunting part of moving up or upgrading to these study level aircraft. Prior to purchasing the Aerosoft Airbus Professional, I was used to flying aircraft from Coronado, Virtual Columbia, and the default Airbus and Boeings that were available in FSX that I managed to port over to Prepared. However, I do want to make it clear for any of you that are thinking of venturing into these more complex virtual aircraft for Flight Simulator, please guys, don't be afraid. There is lots of fantastic homegrown tutorials on YouTube that I certainly watch to get to grips with FMCs, which quite frankly are fairly similar across all aircraft types. However, as I search SimBrief here for my fuel load for this afternoon's flight across to Madrid, maybe it's now that I should own up and let you know that a very good friend of mine here in the village is a captain on board an Airbus A330, and he was a fantastic help to me as I was learning to fly the Airbus. He was also a 737 pilot after gaining his commercial pilot license, and again I was able to touch on his expertise to understand the main key differences between the Airbus and the Boeing 737. And while there are a lot of differences between the Airbus, which is extremely automated, and the 737, which is based I think on about 30 to 40 year technology, it took me less than 2 hours to work it out. And on my second flight between Glasgow and Amsterdam, I was able to complete that flight on the PMDG 737 with very little support. So guys, my advice is to be patient and don't be scared to learn new things, because my enjoyment of Flight Simulator has increased enormously since I moved across or upgraded to these new study level aircraft. As you can see here, I'm using the briefing page on ActiveSky to provide me with the wind speed and directions at top of climb. And just before completing the input into the FMC, like I do in every flight that I take in any of my study level aircraft, I like to check off the flight log from Prepared 3D, ensuring that it is married to the flight management computer in the aircraft that I'm flying. And it's now that I instruct GSX to start the boarding process, which is something I typically do while I'm inputting into the FMC. And while GSX is delivering the passengers safely to the aircraft, it's time for me to check the legs page on the FMC. I'm simply looking for the performance information on departure, because today we're taking off in runway 36, which is the same runway we landed on earlier in the Aerosoft Airbus A320 of British Airways. And with no speed restrictions on the SID that I'm taking today, the target speed is 250 knots, which we know is mandatory below 10,000 feet. And with the baggage all loaded, it is time to close the cargo doors. And this is one that can always get a little embarrassing in the 737NG, and that is not forgetting to transfer the power from the GPU to the APU. And just ahead of startup and pushback, it's time to switch on the exterior lights. Right, it is time to ask GSX to order up a pushback truck. And if you remember from my last video, I did say that the scenery I'm using for Turin was not GSX compatible, and therefore I was unable to use the jetway, hence the reason I was using the stairs to board the aircraft today. And what is common in a lot of non-GSX compatible airports, GSX will only provide a straight pushback and not in the direction of the runway that I'm taking off in this afternoon, which is, of course, runway 36.
Release parking brakes. Commencing push. All engines clear. Start at wheel. Set parking brakes. Ready for your confirmation for good engine start. That is clear. Line is clear.
And it's time to ask for taxi clearance.
Approaching 3-6.
With this particular 737-800 equipped with a head-up display, it would be rude not to use it, as I asked ATC for takeoff clearance. And I do promise in the next sim time that I will have the ATC coming through the main monitor so that the capture software will pick up the instructions. Right, time to stop talking, enforce the sterile cockpit rules as we depart Turin en route for Madrid.
On runway 36.
Has safely departed Turin en route to Madrid Barajas. It's time to look up the legs page again and check our speed restrictions in this phase of the flight. So as you can hear, I'm increasing the speed to 298 knots with a target of Mach 0.78 as we climb through 30,000 feet en route to flight level 370. I know that some of you will be asking why I've chosen to cruise at flight level 370 today. After all, I'm heading westbound. As I've repeatedly said, folks, I do this for fun. I'm not a professional pilot, and to be quite frank, I just took whatever SimBrief offered, and today it was flight level 370. And approximately an hour later, you will find me still in the PMDG 737 at 37,000 feet over Barcelona in northeastern Spain as I start to make the slow descent towards Madrid. At approximately 70 miles out from Madrid, ATC is vectoring me towards runway 32 right. I'm using the Aerosoft professional scenery for Madrid Barajas Airport, and I've flown into this airport in flight sim quite a few times, and this seems to be the runway of choice when the wind is in the prevailing direction. So with me accepting runway 32 right at Madrid, it's time to set up the ILS radio frequencies and course direction. In the modern Boeings, like the 787 Dreamliner from Quality Wings or the 777 that I have from Captain Sim, programming the ILS is completely automated through the FMC. But as I said several times, this Boeing 737 is based a lot on old school technology, and the manual setting of the radios and the course are still required. And at just under 24 miles out, the ILS is starting to appear in the MFD. And here we go, the aircraft has captured the ILS from Madrid, runway 32 right. Vectoring is on to final. And before any flight sim experts complain that I haven't set my landing lights or switched on the fasten seatbelt signs below 10,000 feet, I know guys, I keep saying this is just a game to me. You'll have seen that I'm certainly not following any descent or pre-landing checklists. Well, that's the autopilot disengaged, so the rest of the landing is all down to me, and this is where it gets embarrassing.
Too high, too high. Approaching. 3, right.
I know guys, I've got no idea what is happening here because the sim believes this to be 3-2 right, but I did notice that some of the charts said 3-3 right, and now the RAS also thinks it's 3-3 right. Who cares? I'm on approach. I'm definitely going to land.
400. 300. 200.
Glide slow, 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 glide slow.
20. 10.
Approaching. 1-5 left.
And of course, it is only as I pull off the runway onto the taxiways here at Madrid Barajas that I do realise that I probably should have forced Flight Simulator to give me runway 32 left. Madrid Barajas International Airport is truly enormous. And straight ahead of me, as I taxi off runway 32 right, is the remote gates at Terminal 4. According to the charts I have, Air Europa used Terminal 3, so it's going to be quite a taxi. Turning off the landing lights, turning on the taxi lights, spooling up the APU, switching off the window heats and probe heats, it's time to make that long taxi to Terminal 3. there we go, that proves my point. I should have chosen runway 32 left to land on, because clearly it is much closer to Terminal 3 than the runway that I landed on, leaving me with this really long taxi. Anyway, I'm going to have to wait at the threshold runway 32 left to allow this Ryanair 737 to clear ahead of me.
Approaching. 1-5. Right. On runway 15. Right.
And finally, I'm pulling into the gate area at Terminal 3 with other Air Europa aircraft clearly in view. And that's it! The flight is over. We're finally at the gate. And because I'm not following a checklist, I do have to remember in the 737 to switch the electrical bus over to the APU. It's always rather embarrassing if you forget to do that, switch off the engines, and you lose all electrical power. Anyway, with that done, the lights switched off, it's time to cut the fuel to the engines. And as you can see, Madrid Barajas Professional by Aerosoft is GSX compliant. The jet bridge pulling onto the aircraft and the baggage handling vehicles tell us that this flight and this episode of Sim Time is over. As you can see, I'm no pilot, and therefore my goal of Sim Time is simply to show you what is possible with a PC, a joystick and some software. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Sim Time, and until my next video, thanks for watching.